welcome to AIM Africa Unlocked. This year's theme is innovation and sustainability as the drivers of economic growth. Chinese investment in Africa. And our speaker is going to be Professor Shali Yu, who will take over this session. She is the director of the China Africa Initiative from the London School of Economics. Professor Shali, over to you.
Thank you so much for the so kind introduction, and thank you, AIM team, for the kind invitation as well. So if China's rise represents the biggest global economic transformation of the 21st century, then Africa will certainly be the global economic growth engine for the 22nd century. So both the US and China should rationally invest heavily in Africa in order to ensure its own economic future. But the reality seems to speak the opposite. The US has been retrieving its investment in Africa since 2009, post the global financial crisis. And US's FDI in Africa has been growing negatively since 2014, and particularly post 2017. China is really stepping up to fill that role, particularly during the current Chinese leader Xi Jinping's decade and under the Belt and Road Initiative. And so I explain China's comprehensive investment in Africa from primarily three dimensions. One, China's FDI in Africa. Two, China's digital infrastructure building in Africa. And three, China's lending initiatives in Africa. So first of all, let's start with China's FDI in Africa. In economic terms, 2013 represented a pivotal shift for Africa when China overtook the United States as the leading equity investor on the continent as measured by foreign direct investment. And I think after 2017, China continued to replenish the net FDI outflow by the United States in Africa. And so this pivotal shift since 2013 possibly marks a irreversible turn for Africa with China's replacement of the United States as the continent's largest foreign equity investor. And since 2000, China's trade with Africa has multiplied by 20 times. China's FDI in Africa has multiplied by 100 times. So in 2019, China's overall trade with Africa reached 200 billion US dollars, and China's FDI investment in Africa reached $49 billion. So we can see that trade and FDI really went in tandem in the China's investment experience in Africa. However, China's investment in Africa is oftentimes wrongly perceived as a state behavior or even as a part of China's geopolitical play in an emerging continent. And so I think it's important to dispel some myths there. So first of all, let's see who are the Chinese equity investors in Africa today. According to statistics, 90% of the number of Chinese companies that are currently investing in Africa are Chinese private companies. And 70% of the total value of China's FDI in Africa are from private companies. And so we can see the Chinese private companies are definitely playing a predominant role in this economic engagement in Africa, both in terms of its absolute numbers of involvement, but also in terms of the value of investment. Make no mistake, China's SOEs are the largest infrastructure builders in Africa. They continue to dominate energy, transportation, resources sectors, and these sectors are strategic in nature. They are large, by and large, very big in terms of capital outlay, and they are a long-term return investment. And so 1/3 of Africa's power grid and energy infrastructure today has been financed and constructed by Chinese SOEs. China is really today the most significant foreign contributor to Africa's energy development. But Chinese private companies in Africa today are really not motivated by the goals of the Chinese state. And the reason that they are coming into Africa is very much like how foreign companies came into China 40 years ago at the beginning of China's reform and opening up. And that was primarily driven by economic opportunities. And so let's take a specific look at why, the specific reasons of Chinese private FDIs entering into Africa today. The first reason has to do with demographics, because China no longer has the labor premium it once has. Due to the prolonged one-child policy, China is really today supercharging into an aging society. Next year, by 2022, China will be entering into an aged society status. By 2060, 1/3 of Chinese will be over the age of 65, making China one of the oldest countries in the world. By 2034, on the contrary, Africa's labor force will surpass the entire labor force of China and India combined. Think about that scale. And by 2050, Africa's population will hit $2.5 billion. 2.5 billion people, when China's population will decline to below 1 billion, and with 1/3 essentially of aged population. So Africa's young labor force is really exactly what China's traditional manufacturing industries are seeking today. And what couples with the loss of the demographic dividend in China today is really China's loss of cheap labor. China's labor is no longer low cost. China's per capita GDP hit $11,000 in 2020. Essentially from 2019, sub-Saharan Africa's GDP per capita over that period was a little under $1,600. So roughly 1/8 of China's. And so with that sort of demographic regions where there is the scale, the capacity, the young labor force who are eager to learn, and increasingly there is an abundance of supply of labor force who are willing to enter into the emerging industries. I think China, that's exactly the ideal destination for China's private companies to look into. Chinese private companies today are moving their global reach into increasingly the ASEAN region, but I think over the next decade, increasingly in Africa. The second reason has to do with China's increasing geopolitical tension with the United States. So as the US-China geopolitical tension intensifies, so China now increasingly diversifies its agri imports from the United States to other regional economies. China, since 1985, starting from a self-sufficient agricultural economy to today, China is the world's largest food importer, and food is a quintessential national security subject. And so with that being considered, China is increasingly investing in the world's agricultural fertile regions, including in Africa. And so as a result of that, we're starting to see China's agricultural trade and agricultural investment in Africa have both been booming. The third reason has to do with China's soon ascending status as the world's largest importer. So China today is has been the world's largest exporter, but by 2025, China is projected to become the world's largest importer by replacing the United States. China currently has 400 million middle income class on the horizon. By 2035, in 15 years' time, China would double that with 800 million middle income class. And imagine with 800 million middle income on the horizon, they demand high quality products from the rest of the world at every level. Africa today faces exactly the same situation as China faced 40 years ago when China started its reform process. That is supply shortage. Because it makes sense that today Africa has abundant natural resources, but it's undertapped. So Chinese companies need to come in to upgrade the supply capacity, essentially to continue to satisfy not only China's emerging consumer demand, but also the consumer demand from the rest of the world. And the last reason has to do with investing in Africa. For Africa. Africa today has a 380 million middle income class of its own out of 1.3 billion people. And Africa's urbanization rate has already hit over 40%. And so we are starting to see this burgeoning middle class in Africa, just like where China used to have. And this rising middle class share very similar aspirations for smart city development, energy consumption, education, entertainment, finance, health, etc. So the savvy Chinese private companies, after learning this whole development curve from China, they are just lending that experience and the Chinese business model into Africa to help develop Africa's burgeoning consumer market. And so all of these reasons combined, we started to see very vividly that there is a structural demand for Chinese companies to continue to divert its global footprint into the lesser developed emerging markets in the world in order to continue to capitalize on its production capacity and to continue to satisfy this rising demand of China increasingly as the world's market. And the second component I would like to talk about is China's comprehensive digital engagement in Africa. China's investment in Africa's digital transformation may mean possibly for the first time since the Industrial Revolution in the 1950s that Africa will have a chance to become, first and foremost, the early adopters of the next wave of cutting-edge global technology, namely 5Gs and all the mobile applications that arise on top of the 5G infrastructure. So whoever becomes the early adopters of the frontier global technology will see this massive economic takeoff effect against the rest of the world as a result. And so we saw it through the past three waves of global industrial revolutions. But it's always been the early adopters has always been the North Atlantic regions. And so in a way, the world's developing countries have always been lagging behind. And therefore, we started to see this wider divergence of the global economy. But now it'll be for the first time, possibly with China's engagement in Africa, that Africa, along with all the other emerging economies, may become the first, for the first time, to become the early adopters of global 5G. Now, let's just imagine when Kenya may have 5G before the United Kingdom. I think that really means something profound for global development. And so, but before the digital economy takes off, Africa really needs to develop the digital infrastructure in order for the economy to flourish. Today, nearly 500 million people are wired up on mobile phone services in sub-Saharan Africa. And of all the smartphones that are sold in Africa, about 50% are made in China, and 4 out of every 10 phones that are used in Africa are made by one Chinese company, Transient. So Africa will continue to be the world's fastest growing smartphone market. And now when we have a young population that are essentially smartphone enabled, it really provides the basic prerequisites for the digital economy to flourish. And China now is deeply intertwined with Africa's digital transformation. And here's why. One, China helps to develop Africa's telecom infrastructure. Now, China, under the signature Digital Silk Road Initiative as a part of the Belt and Road Initiative, will soon complete the 12,000 kilometers peace cable that connects from China through Eurasia, through Pakistan, in Djibouti, Kenya, through Africa's east coast, all the way down to South Africa. So it runs along Africa's east coast. The peace cable is essentially constructed by China's Huawei Marine. And peace cable will offer the world's today fastest cable speed with low-cost data transmission that essentially levels off Africa's data infrastructure to the similar level as its northern Eurasian neighbors for the first time. And so on the west coast of Africa, the West Africa submarine cable has been in existence for quite many years now. But a few years ago, Huawei Marine also won the bid to upgrade the West Coast submarine cable. And so today we can safely say that both coasts of Africa are empowered by Huawei's super-fast and low-cost data transmission network that essentially enables Africa's telecom infrastructure and its digital economy to flourish. Now, on top of the telecom infrastructure that China helps to facilitate in Africa, digital applications begin to rise, and once again, borrowing a Chinese digital economy model. So Africa's indigenous e-commerce platform today begin to embrace on this very unique Chinese digital ecosystem model that is essentially the integration of the e-commerce platform along with mobile payments, along with online, offline services, and essentially due to the lack of the 20th century banking and the logistics infrastructure in these emerging economies. And that was exactly that very same infrastructure that China had to tackle 20 years ago. So Africa today is exactly along that same path trajectory. When Jack Ma visited Africa for the first time, Jack Ma said, I see Africa just the same China that I saw 20 years ago when I started Alibaba. And so right afterwards, he decided to invest heavily in Africa. So today, China's e-commerce platform are coming to Africa. They are in where in Kenya, say for example, where the Peace Cable is connected. Kilimall, China Buy, Mambo. These are some of the e-commerce platforms in the country that are all funded by Chinese entrepreneurs. And also China's fintech models led by WeChat Pay, Alipay, and Union Pay are currently expanding very rapidly in Africa as well, working with EcoBank, Equity Bank, and the other African indigenous banks to provide this Africa's indigenous fintech platforms. And thirdly, China is helping Africa to upgrade the logistics infrastructure. In a vast continent in Africa where many languages are spoken and there are many tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade, the cost of mobility and the logistics is clearly very high. According to estimate, 50 to 70% of Africa's current retail sales is attributable to logistics costs. And so China's online, offline digital service model were employed in countries such as Kenya. Again, drones are beginning to be used for transportation and delivery services in Africa. This is the new emerging trend in China as well. China's drone company DJI alone produces 70% of the global commercial drone market share. And so China's logistics transportation services and their solutions are coming to Africa's roads to provide the efficient and the smart shipping and the transportation management systems. And so with all of these, with China's digital infrastructure, China's ecosystem digital application model, and China's support in building this smart logistics system in Africa, overall, that'll help with the culmination of the rise of the Africa's digital economy. And thirdly, I want to talk about China's lending in Africa. China's lending presence is significant. That goes without saying. One is to do with size. China currently owns single-handedly about 20% of Africa's total debt. It's estimated to be around $143 billion. And of course, that's just a ballpark estimate because China doesn't release the specific figures. The other is to do with time. China has a tradition to double or triple its pledges to Africa since 2006 under the scheme of FOCAC, the Forum of China-Africa Cooperation. So it started in 2006 with $5 billion lending. It's doubled to 10 in 2009, to 20 in 2012, and to $60 billion in 2016. In 2018, at the FOCAC meeting in Beijing, China pledged another $60 billion. And so we saw that that was no longer a doubling effect of the previous commitment. So it's impossible for China to continue to double its lending commitment to Africa continuously. So by 2018, I think China probably hit a plateau in terms of the growth rate of its commitments in terms of lending commitment to Africa in 2018. But out of the $143 billion that we just mentioned, about $120 billion were lent in the past 5 years. And so most of the loans are fairly new. And the third is to do with the loan composition. So the earlier pledges from China consisted mostly of grants, zero interest loans, and the concessional loans and export credits. From the official language, the overall level of concessionality and the preferentiality of the Chinese loan is actually decreasing by the year. Concessional loans have been the biggest portion of China's lending commitments to Africa over the past decades. But increasingly, we started to see a steady rise of commercial level loans in the overall composition of debt to Africa. So it's very important to know that there are various players behind this enormous amount of loans to Africa from China, because when it comes to debt relief, which has become an acute issue post the outbreak of COVID-19, it's ultimately up to the owner of different categories of debt to make those sorts of relief decisions. And so China as a government could say that we can relieve the concessional loans, which are fundamentally lent by the Chinese government. But when it comes to commercial loans, which is increasingly taking a larger proportion in the overall composition, commercial loans are lent by private entities. And so it's really not up to the state to make that sort of decision to relieve the debt or to do anything about it. And so that's basically a commercial level decision. Now, I think I want to talk about the outcome of Africa's ultimate debt relief. And of course, I think China has been doing a lot with various levels of debt reliefs that were offered last year, both bilaterally, but also via the WHO and via the G20. But I think countries fundamentally in Africa can do two things out of debt. One is to grow out of debt, and the other is to inflate out of debt. So essentially, there are only these two ways for a country to rise out of debt. I think inflate out of debt is almost never a good solution. So the fundamental solution to Africa's debt situation is really by growth. And so it's really not about not borrowing. I think today for global development, countries inevitably have to resort to a heavy investment-led growth model. So countries in Africa, as a Nobel laureate Mike Spence precisely said, African countries either will have to borrow a lot or have to suffer a lot. So this is the fundamental dilemma. There's really no perfect solution out of this. But I think if countries don't borrow, they will lose the overall chance of winning a ticket for future economic growth. But if countries borrow, they have to make sure that they use the lending wisely to ensure growth. And over a period of time, that growth can more than offset the lending responsibilities. And so for Africa, fundamentally, not to borrow, it doesn't seem to be a viable solution. But of course, excessive borrowing is never a good solution. So it's reasonable borrowing, but to ensure that the borrowing are put in the right place. And primarily in today's world, I think primarily these lending should be put into digital infrastructure to develop the digital economy, to really catch up with the 21st century digital infrastructure to enable this digital economy to flourish. And that over a period of time will deliver the fundamental growth opportunities for Africa.